Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our coaching, publishing, executive ghostwriting, and podcast production services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by Jonathan Shariat, author of Tragic Design. Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Did I pronounce your last name correctly?
You did a good job. It's Shariat.
I did the best I could. As I was joking before, I'm like the Steve Harvey of podcasters. So I appreciate your understanding. You ready to get going on these questions?
Yeah, let's go.
All right, my friend. Question number 1. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
I think the biggest thing that I learned when I was writing my book, the first few months, was that you really have to write your first draft of your outline and throw it out as soon as you can, because it's something that's always going to want to change from what you originally thought to be a cohesive end-to-end experience for your reader.
And what do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
The hardest part about getting published for me was getting to the point where you're getting people's attention, because for me it was a big stroke of luck, because I was writing just out of my own passion and my own need to to document what I'm learning. And so I chose to do that out in the public. And so that's always hard in the beginning, because you have a lot of people who are saying, well, you don't know what you're talking about, or, or you're wrong about this, or you're wrong about that. But just sort of, once you get past that of saying, okay, I'm going to just start writing in public, that really unlocked this opportunity, because without trying, I wouldn't have had the opportunity. And someone from O'Reilly, caught wind of it, and that's how I got the book deal.
I think the biggest thing is just, don't be afraid to take the plunge, right? Just get it out there.
Yeah, just being out there in public, because it's a win-win-win situation. If you don't get, it's like a lot of people say, like, luck is just sort of doing the hard work so that you're ready for certain opportunities that come your way. That's how I felt about it. But it might not come for some people, but you still win because you're getting better at writing, because people are critiquing your work, and you're also winning because you're building an audience over time. So it's a win-win-win situation.
Absolutely. Well, in regards to this journey too, let's talk a little bit about marketing. So please share a marketing strategy that you have used in your book launch that has worked well.
Yeah, I think one of the best things that I was able to do for my book was to start marketing in a sense years before I started writing the book. So really finding channels to start building an audience that I could use in any way I needed to, by providing value to them over time. So I also do a podcast, Design Review, where we talk about, design principles. We talk about, how to get better at design and all that kind of stuff. And so a friend and I do that, at a different cadence. In the beginning, we were doing it every week, but, we've moved to every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks. It's totally fine. Just being consistent and getting it out there is really, really important. I also put together a newsletter for the book once we decided that we were writing it. And everywhere I was at, I was talking about, hey, sign up for this newsletter. And then also, like on social media of, constantly building that up over time by providing value, being a leader in the space. So by the time I even started writing the book, I already had a few channels that I could start, throwing out hints about the book and building up interest around it. And then when the book launched, those were also very, very valuable channels. And then from that, with that audience attention, you get other opportunities like, oh, hey, you should come speak here, or hey, you should come talk about your book on this podcast. So that ends up being a huge, huge help.
So you mentioned that you built your platform over several years. What are some of the
Yeah.
strategies in particular that you would suggest to our listeners to build it? And then obviously you talked about content being one of the biggest things, but what are some ways that you can really get those platforms built up? And what I'd like to ask too, which social media platforms did you focus on as you were building this up in addition to your newsletter?
Well, I'd say the two biggest things on any platform are going to be the same. And one is being consistent, and two is providing value. And that can be a 1 cent, 2 cent value, you're adding to the conversation, but making sure you're adding some value. And a lot of people think that means like, oh, you have to write original content every single day. Like, no, you can say, okay, I found something that is, first of all, the curating something is an act of adding value, but then adding some interpretation or a summary or, a line that you think is interesting and your sort of one line, interpretation of that. Like, these little bits of value are important in actually building an audience, because if you're not adding value, you're just an RSS feed for some,
Yeah.
in some cases. So making sure that in every interaction, and I'm talking about not just, sharing things out, but in commenting in other places, talking to people in real life, or, when you do put together an article, is trying to find ways you can add value to the broader conversation. And then just being consistent, like whether it's something you're going to do daily, weekly, doesn't matter. Being consistent with it is so important. That constant drip is what people really gravitate towards, because if you're willing to put yourself out there and you're willing to be consistent with it, there's a lot of other people who aren't. And so you automatically win to some degree by just being consistent and showing up.
Yeah, and you bring up such a great point with that, because one of the biggest lessons that I've learned with having such amazing guests like yourself, I mean, we're on episode 284 right now, and one of the common themes that we have had over this journey is the fact of the best way to build your platform is to be consistent and to post every single week. And I'll tell you, Jonathan, this is one of the things I struggled with, because I wasn't always consistent with it. And we had Mike Brodie on the show a few weeks ago. He has his own podcast as well, and he said one of the main things was, at minimum, communicating with your list, specifically your list, once a week, and then repurposing that content into a social media post as well. And he said, for me, one of the best fits was to do like a week in review recap of our guests, because we do 5 episodes a week. So now every single Monday, there's an email that goes out to my list, and then we use Buffer to go through our other social media streams, or we take that and repurpose part of that content and go, hey, this is what you've missed on the show over the past week. If you haven't already checked it out, here's the link to subscribe. And then we just had a very quick synopsis over those past 5 episodes. And just by doing that, it's just simple platform building 101, and you're building that further relationship. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You just have to have consistent and have some value.
Yeah, totally agree. And the only thing I would add to that is you can be a little too consistent, in the sense that, oftentimes if you are just publishing, multiple times a day or every day, where you become a nuisance, and that value add starts to tip the other way. Most people don't have a problem with that, because it's so hard to just be on top of that and, whatever else you're doing, like writing the book. But that can be an issue. And I realized that, like if I was active on social media and I was engaging with people, and that was ending up flooding people's feeds, people do not like that. And it's better to have, this drip of high value content, and it's much more something that draws people to follow you and to engage with your content.
Jonathan, what do you feel is the sweet spot in regards to the amount of posts in a day or even in a week?
I found that, one thing a day is good, as far as, if you're creating content. And another good sweet spot is around like two meaty things a week, where people really gravitate towards it. They're looking forward to it, and it's just enough. However, it depends on the platform a bit to be more nuanced than that. If you're resharing things and you're, making, little comments around like, hey, here's how you should be writing a book or something like that, right? So it's a little bit of the wisdom of knowing the platform and knowing what your audience is seeing on the other end. But I've generally tried to keep the meaty posts, or the really, like, if you are creating content like a podcast, keeping that to something like 2 times a week at the most.
In regards to social media, are you mainly focusing on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram? What are your main points of focus?
My main focus was on Twitter and towards the end, LinkedIn. Not because of any sort of strategy, but just because those were sort of the easiest to engage with. But definitely just get started, just make it happen and do it. If it's too much effort to post on all these different platforms, then go for it. But like you're saying, a tool like Buffer really makes that point moot. So just sign up and create accounts for your book or yourself on all these platforms, and then just have a tool like Buffer to manage all of that, and pick a few to engage in every now and again. That's something that I wish I would have done differently, is sort of diversify the platforms that I was working with and kind of engage with all of them here and there. Maybe I can favor one, but still put some time into commenting here and there and engaging with people. I would definitely do that over again.
Now, in regards to your comments, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, real quick. Another thing is, I think LinkedIn is a totally underappreciated resource for a lot of types of books and audiences, because it's a lot of people are highly engaged with it. Your job is very important, and your professional connections is very important. And in the industry I'm in tech, it's very underutilized, and you can use it, and really people will engage with you. I've been seeing a lot of great engagement with it, so that's something that I'm continuing to develop and use.
Yeah, LinkedIn is something that I feel really is underutilized, because one of the questions I get is, how do you get most of your guests? And my answer is LinkedIn, because we reach out. My team reaches out to quite a few people out there and go, hey, we'd love to have you on the show. I mean, that's how you and I connected to get you on the show. LinkedIn, I think, is one of probably the greatest area of opportunity in regards to any of the current social media platforms, because there is just such an opportunity for engagement and to build relationships, and especially more on the business side versus more of the social side. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
The other thing I wanted to ask you was, you mentioned comments a couple times. So are you referring to comments for your own posts, or are you talking about comments on other people's posts?
Yeah, both. Definitely both. Adding value can be by actually creating the content. Maybe you're writing a Medium post, you're, creating some sort of how-to or a podcast or something. But the value add that I found that can even generate more consistently, those followers or engagement that you're looking for, is really just the one-on-one, one-off, conversation that you have through leaving comments, and really not just weak, that's great comments, but really engaging with someone. And you can, really build up a really large audience over the course of 3 years by just, getting a few followers every day. And so if you think about it in a much smaller scale, of, I just need to, get a few followers every single day, and they're high quality ones, because you're building these relationships with people by, actually engaging with them on a very personal level of, going deep on what they talked about, or, providing them some advice that you have, or asking for more clarification. That interaction builds relationship, and that relationship is worth a lot more than some bot following you. So
yeah.
That kind of built small, very small, every single day over the course of years is a very powerful tool. And, like what you can do over the course of years, a lot of people underestimate that.
Absolutely. I mean, there was no such thing as as an overnight success, right? No such thing. It takes years of grinding and building your audience on a daily basis. Nothing comes easy. And that's one of those things. You just bring up such a great point, where you're building a couple people every day, and it snowballs over time.
Yeah. Exactly. And they, I'm getting this from a wonderful TED Talk that you can look up, but they did a lot of research around looking at kids longitudinally over time and seeing, how they were successful later in life. And the number one characteristic was grit. So, there's a lot to be said there of just sticking with it and doing something every day that's hard and getting really used to that. That skill in of itself is going to help you to be successful in so many areas.
Well, you ready for the hard question?
Oh, no. Yeah.
Yeah, that was the easy one. The hard one is this. What is your favorite book? And what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
Ooh, that is a hard one. Yeah, let me think about that for a second. I mean, I've read a lot of different kind of books. I like to kind of cycle between the different books that I read. So I'll try and read some fantasy. I'll try to read some, biography and some personal development and some books that are just for my own business growth. What was the second part of your question?
Just what was the number one thing that you learned from it? So what's the main thing you learned with that
As
genre?
far as marketing the book?
As far as everything. As far as just, takeaways
okay.
that you get out of it that helps you in your journey.
Yeah, I would say, like, from a marketing standpoint, there's this great writer. He wrote, like, The Theft of Two Swords. I'm blanking on his name, but I really enjoyed not just the books, which were amazing. There's like a million of them, but he's done a great job marketing the book because he really feels like he uses so many different platforms and really engages with his audience in a very real way. So being very, very transparent around where he's at writing and editing the book, what his challenges are at the moment of marketing the book. And it's pretty successful, but he's still, instead of saying, everything's great, it's a massive success, he'll say, like, hey, we're having trouble with this, getting this to you, or, and then he maybe creates some sort of way around that for you to engage with him. So definitely working through a publisher and also engaging with your audience just on your own terms is really important. And that's something that I want to do more of with my audience, is to say, yes, okay, O'Reilly published the book, that's great. But, hey, if you want to, do a class, let's do a class. Like, hey, if you want to, talk about this book, I will come to your book club, or I will call into your book club. And all these kind of things, you can make it much more personal. And again, kind of that one-on-one, every single day type of thing builds up over time. I want to do more of that.
Excellent. And for a final question, what is your favorite quote and why?
I just recently went across a quote from Jack Ma, the CEO of Alibaba, that I really, really liked. And he said, there's no expert of today, just an expert of yesterday. And I really like that because it really makes real the challenge that we have every single day to say, okay, you're looking around yourself and you see all these really talented people like yourself, who are doing amazing marketing, and I wish I would have done this, I wish I would have done that. But the good thing is that every single day is an opportunity to change the way that things are done, to learn, to grow. And so there's so many things that are changing in the future that it's always worth investing and starting right now, today. And so every time I feel like, I don't want to start another book, or, I'm not going to be as good as this person, or I'm not going to be able to do that, I just remember that, like, over time, things change. And so if I start right now, I will be that expert in a certain amount of time, or I will be the person who's talking about the latest marketing things, because I'll get through it and I will learn.
Well, Jonathan, I want to thank you for being a guest on this show. What is the best way for people to find you online?
Yeah, if you are interested in the book, you can find more about that at tragicdesign.com. You can find me on Twitter as DesignUXUI, and you can also find my email on both those places.
Well, Jonathan, thank you once again for being on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
All right. Yeah, thank you so much. Looking forward to reading the book you recommended to me before in the podcast. He's written a book about podcasting 101, so I'm going to read that and apply all of that to my personal podcast.
thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how you can be featured in our brand new Get Published business book, go to getpublishedpodcast.com.